Okay, welcome. Here we are tonight with our Q&A. So this is the show where we take people's garden questions and we talk about them and we answer the questions according to our experience, and it's super fun. This is a big deal because this is 52 weeks since I started. It's actually been over 52 weeks, but this is the 52nd recording because some of the weeks we didn't do it due to internet issues and Thanksgiving and boot camps and other events when I don't do them. So this is 1 year, and I've had so much fun, we're going to do it for another year. So welcome to Gardening with William DeMille. This is our Thursday Q&A. This is where I help you have the very best garden of your entire life. We discuss all things gardening, farming, livestock, the Georgic tradition, soil health, education in general. The purpose of this is to increase your health from the ground up. So here we go, May 5th, 2023. It's been a beautiful cold day here in the middle of northern Nevada. It's been cold, 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 and it might freeze tonight. The apricot tree just barely started blooming, so I don't think we're going to lose fruit in the next 3 nights. So we will see. We're very close to having an apricot crop this year, which is so exciting. My book is done. It looks like this, Worry-Free Eating by William DeMille. It's available on Amazon. Go to Amazon, look this up, order it. This will be your guide to building your own soils and to having the very best gardens in the whole world. So tonight we're going to get into some questions. I've had questions over the week, so I made that my topic. So the first question was about root crops. So I'm going to go into root crops a little bit, and then we're going to get into the actual question on another slide. There's a lot of foods that are root crops, but the common root crops that I grow and most people in North America eat are potatoes, carrots, onions, garlic, and that's about it. Parsnips, parsley, and shallots are less common, although I really have begun having a love affair with shallots lately. They are so incredibly exciting when you get them in the kitchen. It's wonderful what you can do with shallots. The greens of the leaves are cool. They're beautiful. They're great. They have a sugary flavor. The parsley roots, most people think of parsley as a green garnish on the side of your T-bone steak when you go out to eat and you leave it on the plate and the waiter takes it away at the end. But parsley can grow an edible root, which is a fantastic sweet white root that can be a really very awesome culinary delight in the kitchen. And parsnips are an old vegetable. You notice I didn't put turnips and radishes on here because I'm not sure they're food. I guess they are, but they're not that exciting in the kitchen. But parsnips are fun. Parsnips are a little bit too sweet to eat alone. They almost have a sickening sweet flavor, but they're good. They're very good with other things. When it comes to onions, I think onions are a dish of themselves. Ezekiel is on tonight. His wife may be there with him listening. And they know that when they come to my house, sometimes they catch me cooking an entire frying pan of chopped up onions and eating them as if they are the main dish.
Unacceptable behavior.
Yeah, Zeke's making a comment here. But so yeah, people tend to think that onions are like an ingredient to go in other things. Not in my house, man. They are the main dish. If you get the right onion and you cook it the right way, it is like eating the food of the heavens. So how do we grow root crops? Sometimes there can be problems with knowing how to grow root crops. Generally, when we harvest root crops, there's a significant amount of tillage that happens. And so when people start going down the road of soil health, and they're on a soil health journey to learn how to create functioning soils, root crops become even more of a mystery, because if you're not going to till the soil, how do you grow a root crop? Well, let's just go through my points here that I put in this slide. For potatoes, you're going to cover your soil with 6 inches of a mulch, and then you're going to put the potatoes on the soil level under that mulch. And so this is like a compost type mulch. If you have a really if you have lots of bad things in the mulch, the potatoes don't do very good. So anytime you're using a compostable type of a material, if it has a bad smell, there's a good chance that it's going to rot the potatoes. But with a really good, highly oxygenated detritus, then your potatoes will not rot at all, and they will be disease-free, and they will grow beautifully. So when it comes to carrots, you need to have your detritus in place for 3 or 4 years, or you are starting with a finished sifted compost. So it needs to resemble a tilled up soil to get a good contact with those carrots. So plant your carrots about 1/4 inch deep, and then you cover them with some kind of a board. If you're making a long row, you can put a 2x4 right on the row where you planted them. After you water them, you put that 2x4 on, and that will keep them moist, because your soil can dry out really quickly down to about 1/2 inch. And it takes carrots a long time to grow, to germinate. That first growth can take up to 14 days sometimes. Usually when I grow carrots, we're seeing them come up in 7 to 10 days, but they can take 2 weeks. And so that is discouraging, especially when the sun's coming down hot, because you could be running out there 5 times a day to mist the top of that soil. And so people get really discouraged with carrots because they don't come up well. The reason they don't come up well is because they dry out before they come up. That's why I have learned the trick of putting a board on top of the row, because that board will insulate and shade and keep the moisture in that shallow area. And so after about 5 days, you need to start looking under that board. And as soon as you see carrot sprouts starting to come up, remove that board. And then during this whole process, you need to keep that soil moist. So depending on your soil conditions, on your climatic conditions, on the sunshine, there's a lot of conditions, but you need to make sure that it stays moist no matter what the condition is. So that's what I know about carrots. Onions. Start onions and parsley in seed. Start the seed in plug trays, for little seedling trays. And then when they get root bound in the seed tray, that's usually about 8 weeks old, then you can take the plug out and stick them in the ground. I find that onions and parsley transplant exceptionally well. So I always like to start them in a plug tray. Carrots, on the other hand, do not transplant well. You can transplant them and you can get them to grow, but it's hard to get a nice, long, straight root. And that's because the baby microscopic roots of lettuce that's first coming out, not lettuce, but carrots, when that root is first coming out and going down in the ground, it'll be just a teeny tiny, almost microscopic root that's going down, and it can go down a long ways. And so you need to focus on that carrot to get that taproot going down in place, because once you start transplanting it, you're messing up that taproot. And so when you pick your mature carrot 3 months later, that carrot's not going to have a nice long straight root, and that's what you want. Okay, so garlic and shallots, you plant the individual cloves, so you'll have your dried mature root. It's really not a root, but we call them root crops anyway. But you take those cloves and you would take them apart so you have each individual clove, and then you plant those about 6 inches apart. And I plant the garlic and shallots in the fall. Now, all shallots may not be created equal. There could be some pretty great varieties out there that are more cold hardy than others. I don't know about that for sure. I'm not a super expert on shallots. but the ones that I grow, I plant them in the fall in the greenhouse, and they do fantastic in the greenhouse, and they give us green shallot leaves like a green onion all winter long. And then both the garlic and the shallots are ready to harvest around June. And you harvest them when the tops are completely dead and dried up. You can harvest them. If you want to braid a garlic braid, then you need to harvest it before the tops are completely dry. Otherwise, they just crumble up. So you'd have to pick them a couple of weeks earlier than being completely dried. So when they begin to dry, that's when you would pick them. But in cold climates, garlic is extremely cold hardy. You plant it in the fall and it'll come up beautiful. I have a lot of garlic outside right now that did very well under months and months of snow drifts and ice. And now that the snow has melted, it's growing fantastic. So that is pretty great. So there's some general information about some root crops. I'm going to go to the next slide, and we're going to talk about root crops a little bit more. So Helena's the one who asked about root crops, and she said, how do you know when root crops are ready to harvest? Carrots and beets. I seem to harvest mine too late, and they are kind of woody. Here's the deal. The smaller the plants are, with almost any plant out there, except for grains. But in the world of vegetables, and especially roots, the smaller they are, the better they are. No, that's just a general idea. Okay. So how do you know when? Just kind of pull the dirt with your finger away from the top of the carrot root, right at the soil surface. Dig down 1/2 inch. Move some of that loose dirt away. And if the carrot looks like it's big enough to eat, then start pulling them and eating them. I like to plant a lot so that when I harvest them, I have a continual harvest coming on all the time. I like to, I like to be able to pull, a dozen carrots once a week to bring into the kitchen. So I'll plant a big row of carrots and I'll start eating them by just looking up and down the row, and I'll start picking the biggest ones out. And that gives a little bit of room for some of the other ones around those ones to continue to grow. So that's how I do it. So the first ones that I start picking are pretty little and they're pretty good. And then as the time progresses, I'm pulling, every other carrot for a while, and that gives room for the other carrots to get really big. And then by the end of the season, I have a lot of big carrots. And I really like to plant carrots probably about 4 times a year. In the fall, I plant carrots, and that means late summer. So the end of August, September, I like to plant carrots. And then those ones will get big, and then they freeze in the winter. And after your first 1 or 2 frosts, you dig those up. They're super sweet. You put those in the root cellar. And you can pack those in 5-gallon buckets with really clean sand, just like sand that you would have like in a sandbox for a child to play in, or builder's sand that they would make cement with. And then you keep that sand moist, and it will keep those carrots really crunchy, and they won't lose humidity in your root cellar. So that works for carrots and beets and most root crops. It even works for potatoes, but usually if you're cold and high humidity in your root cellar, then you won't have to have them in sand. What I'm saying is that potatoes last a lot longer just in a bag than carrots do. Carrots tend to dehydrate a lot easier and quicker than a potato does in the root cellar. Okay, so Helena continued. She got a potato seed from me during boot camp, and she's intimidated about planting them. So I would say, there's so many ways you can plant potatoes. They want to be in the ground a little bit, and then they grow into these big, beautiful plants. They will grow in a healthy, oxygenated, detritus sphere, like a good compost. They don't do well in an uncomposted detritus sphere. But if you have wood chips on the ground that have been on the ground and decomposing for a couple of years, dig down in there and smell it. And if it has no odor at all, or a very good odor, like a forest floor, then that means it's highly oxygenated and your potatoes should do fine. There's a lot of people growing potatoes in permanent wood chip beds. They kind of call that the back to Eden method. And there's a lot of gardeners out there having good success with that. So yeah, in a no-till system, you can certainly grow potatoes without a lot of digging going on. So yeah, the Paul Gauchis of the world do it. The Charles Dowdings of the world do it. These are some of our greatest gardeners out there, and they're doing a fantastic job of potatoes. And their soils are so soft because they have such a thick, vibrant, beautiful detritus sphere that that they can just grab the whole plant and pull it up, and there's no digging involved. You're just pulling up the vine, and as the roots come up, the potatoes are hanging there. And then there will be a few that stay in the ground. You can dig around a little bit with your fingers and get them, but you don't need the big mechanical tillage implements. Now, if you have a 500-acre field of potatoes for market, you're certainly going to be using mechanical means to do that. But in home gardening context, you can do this with and hardly have a shovel or a pitchfork to do it. We harvested a lot of our potatoes here last year without a pitchfork or anything. No digging. We're just pulling them up, and here they come. And we're blessed with an area that has a lot of sand in it. So if you have a sandy soil, fantastic for root crops. They will be happy, and you will be happy. If you have a heavy clay soil, then just get a thick detritus sphere on top. And just to remind you, a detritus sphere is the decomposing organic matter on top of the soil surface. So that would be your compost or your wood chips or your grass clippings, whatever you're collecting to put on there. Hopefully you're collecting 50 or 60 different things to make that detritus sphere. Leaves that you're raking up, wood chips, all that stuff. Okay. So Helena, you also were talking about different types of foods for the plants, blood meal, eggshells. You know, I have fed my plants a little bit of fish emulsion, but you got to be careful not to feed anything in the nightshade family too much nitrogen. So blood meal, I would say you may not grow very many potatoes, but you would get a gigantic plant. So be very careful. I would say don't give blood meal to them. Eggshells are going to be good because the calcium will help the rest of the soil function. So that'd be a good idea. Maybe give a half dose of a fish emulsion or a fish hydrolysate to your potato plants. So if you bought a gallon of fish fertilizer, read the instructions and it'll probably say, for garden vegetables, mix up 1 gallon of water with a tablespoon, and then water your plants with this once a month. So you could do that, except just use a half a tablespoon. So that's going to be a half dose. And then that would be good. And if you're getting good growth with your potatoes, if they're a nice green color and you're getting fast growth, then they probably have plenty of nutrients and they're going to grow potatoes. Never let your potatoes dry out. They like a moist soil. Never let them get too wet. So if they're too wet, and so if your soil is not draining out and you have puddles of soil, like if you've dug with your shovel a little tiny hole and then you put 4 or 5 cups of water in there, if that water doesn't drain into your soil within 15 to 20 minutes, then you need to build your detritus sphere up. And this is why gardeners say to garden on a raised bed, is because the water doesn't drain out quickly. So yeah, potatoes want to be in a well-drained soil, but they never want to get dry. So there are some ideas about root crops today. Hopefully some of this information was helpful. If you have more questions, we can certainly do that. I did get one more question this week. Melanie asked, today she texted me or Facebooked me or whatever it is. I don't know. I don't understand technology, but I got a question and it said, so mixing up plant families on a larger garden, what do you suggest to plant with melons and watermelon? Have you done the Three Sisters method with melons instead of squash? Yes, I have done Three Sisters with melons. It works fantastic. It works just as good as squash because they're the same thing, meaning that they are in the same family. So after I got your question, I jumped on the internet and I grabbed this picture right here. So this is just on the internet. And what I did is I went to Google and I put in plant family chart. And there were dozens of charts. And so I just threw this one in here. So all credit goes to Google and whoever this website is. So Three Sisters is commonly corn, beans, and squash. That is the old time of idea. And it's always done good. But I'm guessing that the Native Americans, they were pretty smart. I think there were other plants growing besides corn, beans, and squash. It's just that they would plant corn, beans, and squash, and then other random plants would grow. And we call those things weeds. Well, let's just pretend for a minute that there were some weeds growing in most people's gardens because most people have weeds. And as long as your plants you want to grow are doing good, you don't mind if the weeds are there. We only mind the weeds if they take over, and then the plants we want don't do well. So I'm going to assume that over the hundreds or thousands of years or however long it was that the Native Americans were growing Three Sisters, that there were weeds there. And what that gives us is 4 plant families, the plant family of whatever the weed was. And then they had the grass family, the legume family, and the cucurbit family, which is corn, beans, and squash. So with 4 plant families, secondary metabolites get turned on in soils, which gives you really good flavors, really good nutrition, and it gives you pest resistance and disease resistance. And so that's fantastic. Here's what I'm going to do this year. I'm going to do the Three Sisters, except it's going to be, I guess, 5 sisters, because I'm going to plant corn, beans, squash, carrots, and potatoes. So I'll have the 3 common families, plus the umbel family and the nightshade family. And I did this last year. I had potatoes and carrots growing with my corn last year. Fantastic. They did very, very good. My students who were here for 4 months, they went home and I told them the potato crop was over, but we had about 20 potato plants in a sweet corn patch that we didn't get. And I went in there like a week after they went home, and I started digging them up, and I had to take pictures and send my students because those potatoes were perfect. They were large. They were absolutely perfect. They did better than our potato field where we had mostly potatoes. We did let some other crops grow not crops, but other weeds grow in the potato field to try to get more plant families. But where we had the corn, we had corn and beans, and there were squash, there were peas in there. There were a bunch of weeds. There were sunflowers and the potatoes, but the potatoes in that corn patch were fantastic. Absolutely great. So here's what you do when you're thinking about Three Sisters. Turn it into 4 or 5 sisters, but make sure they are different plant families, because modern science has taught us, and this is a breakthrough in science just in the last decade or so. It may be going on 12 years or something, but it's like just very, very brand new information that the 4 plant families growing together will turn on secondary metabolites. And of course, it's the microbes that turn the genetics on. But that's food for a different class. But so yeah, here's a chart. Just go to Google, look up the plant you want. So if you're growing tomatoes, just go to Google and say, what is the plant family of tomato? And it'll come up and it'll say Solanaceae, or it will say nightshade family. They're the same family, different words. A lot of these families have different words for the family, and what the word says, don't worry about it. Because if you find a chart like this, it pretty much shows you. So yeah. See what my next slide is. I guess that's it. My book's done. Order my book. It's ready to go on Amazon. If you're not getting my newsletter, it's because I don't send it out very often if you've signed up. But if you want to get it, go ahead and sign up at my website, georgicrevolution.com. I do have a waiting list for my 17-week farmer training class for 2024. 2023 this year is ready to go, and my students show up in 2 weeks. So that's pretty exciting. So that'll get going. But I already have one person wanting to come in 2024. So if you know people interested in this, you need to get your name on the list so that you can actually come if you're wanting to do that. And I have a new date for summer boot camp is August 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So get that on your calendar. Let your friends and family know. So last week, we didn't have this class because I was doing our spring boot camp last week. We had an incredible, wonderful group of people here, and it was fantastic. It was fun. I think we had a good time. It was the first really intense sunny day. Winter had kind of gone away, and it was kind of hot. So the day we were outside all day was a little bit draining on us because we were not used to the weather. I'm going to stop my screen share here, and let's just have a conversation about this. Open it up for questions, clarifications. So whoever unmutes and asks, go ahead.
I have a quick question that's kind of on topic for tonight. So I planted all my potatoes in about a foot of straw that had been breaking. It broke down over fall and all winter. I made sure it stayed wet all those times if it wasn't covered in snow. And I planted them, but I don't feel like I'm getting a lot of like actual sprouting. I feel like they are just kind of sitting in there. And I've been making sure they're at the right kind of moisture. They're not too hot. They're not too dry. They're not too wet. So I was just wondering, like, how long do potatoes take to send out shooters, or is there something I can do to promote? I don't know if germination is the right word, but promote germination.
Yeah, so potatoes take forever to come up. I always get scared in the springtime because you go out there, you plant your potatoes. 2 weeks later, you dig one up and it's just sitting there. Nothing's happened. There's no roots on it. It's just sitting there. And that means your ground is too cold and it still thinks winter's here, which it is. Potatoes need a perfect temperature to start growing. I've planted potatoes and it's been 4.5 weeks before the potato starts to grow roots when you dig it up. And so it's a good 5.5, 6 weeks before the little sprout comes up. So I don't get in a hurry of planting potatoes too early in the season. I would rather keep the potato seed protected in my, in my house or wherever I'm storing them until it's time, until the soil temperature is good. And I can't even tell you the soil temperature to sprout a potato off the top of my head, but you could Google it super fast. And the internet would tell you, but the soil, they are a cool weather crop, but they don't want it to be too cold. So, that's kind of, I don't know. Was that helpful? So don't go out there and dig them up and bring them back in the house. Now that you've planted them, leave them there. They'll probably be fine. But just know that it can take a while until that soil, that detritus sphere, your rotten straw that you've planted them in, gets to a temperature where they want to start growing. So you just have to be patient. But temperature is the thing. Keep them moist, keep it watered. Temperature is the key. When spring comes, they will come up. So I have some questions here in the chat. John said, where do you put the potatoes if you're planting 5 groups? Do you do it in a circle? So I just plant stuff random. Let's use corn for an example, because I planted potatoes with my corn last year. I like to use a mechanical planter with corn. So if I'm going to plant a field of corn, I'm driving a tractor. And so I will just drive through there with my corn planter, and then it plants all my rows of corn. And then I let the corn come up and grow for a couple of weeks. And as soon as the corn comes up and I can see the row of corn, I'll go between the corn plants. So about every 5 corn plants, right between them in the row, I'll dig a hole and I'll put a potato in there. So the potatoes are spaced out about every 6 feet. And then between the corn plants and between the potatoes, I'll drop a sunflower seed about every 20 corn plants. So there's only a few sunflowers out there in the field. And then you wait until the corn gets 3 leaves on it. So it's about 4 to 6 inches high. And that's when you go in and you plant your beans and your other things, whatever they are, cantaloupes, muskmelons, watermelons. So I wait. So that's about 4 weeks later after the corn was planted when it will be at that 3-leaf stage. Now, I hate to tell you that it's 4 weeks later because it's going to be different in different climates, in different areas of the country, different, species or varieties of corn. So timing doesn't matter. What matters is when the corn has 3 leaves on it. That's when you go in and you plant your other stuff. So that's how I would incorporate all of these crops into a cornfield. But you want your corn planted at a normal density, or else it's not going to grow right. So don't think in your head, oh, that sounds good, so I can just put a corn plant here and there throughout the garden like we put the sunflowers. That's not going to work. They need to be planted in a square so that pollen can float all around, because you've got all that microscopic pollen that's going all over the place, and it needs to be really thick in the atmosphere in that corn patch so that you get good full ears of corn that are filled with grain. Otherwise, you don't get a very good crop of corn. So there's that. Hope that answered that, John. Helena asked, are sweet potatoes planted and harvested like regular potatoes? No, they're not. Botanically, they're a completely different plant. They're in a completely different plant family. They're not related at all. Sweet potatoes take a long growing season. They like a sandy soil, and they need hot weather to grow in. It's easier to grow sweet potatoes in your climate, Helena, than it is to grow normal potatoes. So yeah, and you want to start the sweet potatoes from a plant. So you can put a sweet potato in the ground and it will grow, but it's better if you put a sweet potato just in a shallow pot, like 2 inches of soil around it. Just lay it down, grow it in the house for a month or so until the little plants start growing up. And when they get about 4 inches tall, then you can uncover the potting soil off that sweet potato, and there will be roots coming off of the end of those little shoots, and then just pick that off pick it off of the potato. But so you have leaves going one way, you have roots going the other, and the side of it will be attached to that sweet potato. Pick it off and then go transplant it in the garden. Then transplant those about 2 feet apart in the garden, and yeah, but you should have good success with sweet potatoes down there in that Tokerville region where you live, because you have warm nights and a long growing season. Melanie says, the back of the Square Foot Gardening book has a chart which tells what family each plant is, along with numbers in each square. That's fantastic. She continued, I'd like to know if you make a mistake with planting in an incompatible plant next to another, or too many of one family near each other would, yeah. You know, there's a lot of gardening books out there that say you shouldn't plant this plant with that plant. I mean, I'm sure that that's true from some people's experiences, but I've never really seen that be a true trend. So there's one book that says never plant garlic with strawberries. There's another book that says always plant garlic with strawberries. A lot of things we know about gardening is false. Okay. There's so many publications over the decades that is people's ideas. It's that are folklore, it's traditions. A lot of immigrants came from all over the world, and that's what America was made of traditionally. And people brought their ideas with them. And there's just a lot of old time folklore mixed up with gardening. And I've never seen plants be incompatible. I was planting sage with a bunch of other vegetables, and a guy that I was working with, we were employees together at a farm we both worked at. And he got freaked out and said, oh, all that stuff's going to die. The sage is going to kill it. And I don't know where he got that idea, but he believed it. Well, I had experience growing sage with plants, and I went ahead and did it, and everything thrived. So don't worry about planting things together that are not compatible, because I've never really seen plants be incompatible. What happens is people have soils that don't function and soils that are filled with anaerobic and compacted conditions. And then you have things planted together and you have one species that dies, and people blame it on a plant that it was growing by. And it had nothing to do with that. It was a bad soil situation. It was bad microbes in the soil, the disease causing microbes, anaerobic conditions, bad water, high salts, stuff like that. And I've never seen plants that hurt each other. Now, I'm not saying that it's not true. I'm just saying that I have not experienced that to the extent that I know that plants are not compatible. So for melons, how do you plant them in a hill or a row? I never do the hill method with melons. A lot of people say, yeah, you make a hill, and that's in gardening books everywhere. So when you make a hill, that's ancient technology in wet regions that came before the idea of making a raised bed. So a raised bed is new technology in wet regions where water wouldn't drain. And so they would they'd pile up a bunch of dirt, and then they'd put their plants on there. And then the plants would grow. And then when summer comes, they need more water because they're up on a hill. So I just put the seed directly in the rows with the corn, the way I explained earlier. How far apart in the square do you plant corn? I put corn seeds 1 foot apart usually. My mechanical planter plants it about 6 inches apart. Either way is fine. Melanie continues, you don't have to put the sweet potato shoot in water to root it then. Yeah, you can put it in water or in potting soil or just plant it in the garden. So yeah, let me just repeat how to do that. Put the sweet potato in water. So half of it's in water, half of it's in the air. That's one method. Or you can just plant it in the ground. Cover it with some soil. That's another method. Both ways work fine. As soon as you see the shoots coming up and the shoot has a roots attached to it, just pull that shoot off of the plant. Not the plant, pull it off the big sweet potato you planted in the first place. That's what I meant by a plant. Okay. Anybody else have questions? You can type it in the chat. You can unmute and ask.
I have a couple of questions because I've been trying to get caught up on my Patreon videos from you. So my first question is about Claytonia. I know you let your Claytonia, it just reseeds itself in the Wallapini. Will it reseed itself just in regular garden beds, or should I be planting it? Because I have a greenhouse space and then I have my regular garden beds. So should I just be planting it in the greenhouse space so it winters over well, or does it matter?
Okay, here, it doesn't matter. It will reseed itself. It reseeds itself so good that maybe you don't want to let it reseed itself in certain places because it can become a weed problem. I mean, you know me really good, Jocelyn. You know that I love jungles. I love it when the plants are just growing and thriving and taking over, because that makes it really easy for me to have compost materials at hand. And so I just, you just attack certain jobs like an Olympic sport, and you go in there and you rip it up and you throw it in the compost. If you're trying to avoid the physical labor aspect, you may not want to let everything reseed as much as I do. But so outside, it will reseed just like inside, no problem. You do have to let it flower and let it mature enough that it will reseed. So if you're picking it all the time and eating it and it never flowers, it's not going to reseed. So you have to let some of it reseed if you want to. Now, it's important to understand what the Claytonia wants. It wants cold weather, and it wants lots and lots of water. So if you want it to reseed outside, you may be using more irrigation water and more sprinkling than your climate will naturally give you. So I don't know if you want to try to make that happen. It's a lot easier to make happen in a greenhouse because the greenhouse is naturally a lot more moist. There's a lot more humidity in the greenhouse. So that's a more natural place to, to just let that happen naturally. Did that help? Was that sufficient?
Yes, that's very helpful. I guess my other question would be is, I saw that you were growing alfalfa as composting material. My question is does it only function as that nitrogen element when it's fresh, or if I were to go buy a bale of alfalfa and mix it in with my other cut greens? Like, understanding that fresh is better, but it's like, what's the difference that I'm going to get between growing my alfalfa and using it in compost and buying alfalfa, or the alfalfa that the cows decide is too stemmy and throw out?
Okay, so a really high quality alfalfa, bale of alfalfa that's nice and green and super high protein. It didn't get rained on when the farmer was trying to get it to dry. It's going to be just as good as fresh alfalfa that you're growing and you cut it and it's green. So they're going to be the same. They'll both be super fantastic high nitrogen source to make a good quality compost. Now, the old alfalfa that's left over in your barnyard and it's been sitting around a while, it will tend to start losing that high nitrogen component. So treat it more like a green component and not your high nitrogen mixture. So yeah, there is one more thing about alfalfa. I will tell you what it is, but I don't have an answer for it, but it's a very interesting thing to think about. Alfalfa has a chemical in it, just natural growing alfalfa, and the chemical component is called tricantanol. And don't ask me to spell it because I can't, but tricantanol, it's basically spelled how it sounds. But it's a growth hormone that helps the alfalfa grow. And that's one reason that alfalfa grows so fast. And in warm climates, alfalfa farmers can get 8 cuttings a year of alfalfa. And, you know, it's growing every month, and you have a harvest ready to like every 4 to 5 weeks. And, but the beautiful thing is about the trikentanol is when you cut the alfalfa and you use that in your garden as a mulch, and you can put it in a blender and blend it up and spray that alfalfa on your plants, you get that trikentanol on the other plants and it helps them grow. The part that I don't know is if trikentanol is only in the fresh growing plant or if it's in the alfalfa hay. I don't know that. The other thing I don't know is if it's good for other plants to be spraying that on them. I do know it helps them grow because I've done it and I see significantly quicker growth. And the plants seem to be incredibly healthy and beautiful. In the long run, is it a good idea? I don't know, but it's pretty cool that we can do that. So those are things to think about. We need more young people in the sciences figuring out all these questions that we keep coming up with. Fantastic questions, Jocelyn. Okay, let's go to the next question. Ron, do you guys have a question tonight? Or are you just here to learn and listen?
Well, we're here to learn and listen. Holly, any questions?
I can't think of anything. I'm taking lots of notes. It's faster than my pencil can go.
Okay, all right, good. Melanie typed in another question here. In a 4x4 square foot bed where you plant each of the 5 sisters, Melanie, help me with that one. Was that a complete thought?
I'm sorry, it's where do you plant each of the 5 sisters? I like your idea rather than the 3.
Okay. It doesn't matter. Mix it up like a jungle.
Okay.
I mean, so you're doing like a square foot gardening and it's 4 feet by 4 feet. I'd put a kernel of corn in all 4 corners, and then put let's see, 4 feet by 4 feet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You should be able to get 12 stalks of corn in there. So just evenly spaced 12 seeds of corn in there. And you could probably get away with putting 2 corn seeds in each spot where you plant. So 24 corn seeds, but only 12 holes where you're planting them. And space them out right on the edges, and then mix, and the ones in the center, just mix them so they're even. All right. And then and then you can put probably 2 or 3 potato plants in there and have them kind of close to the edges so that they can sprawl out a little bit because they're going to take up a lot of room. And then just throw in a couple of carrots here and there, and put in a cucumber and a cantaloupe and a watermelon, and see what happens. It'll be a fantastic scientific glory. It'll be so much fun.
So in that situation, how do you hill your potatoes?
You don't. Oh.
You add some handfuls of compost as they begin to grow up. Just get some straw, old rotten hay that's weed free, or wood chips, or something else, and you just put right around that plant to shade the young growing potatoes.
So, and the potatoes then are in the corners, you said?
Wherever you want, but probably because they're going to get big, and you want them to kind of sprawl out a little bit and not be crushing everything else inside the bed. Crushing's the wrong term, but like shading, you know.
Yeah.
Now,
and then
there's one more super important thing we need to think about. We talked about this during boot camp a little bit. I haven't really taught this too much, but as I keep going down this journey, I keep finding that people need to know this. And I don't know how come I know it. I've been doing this for so long that it came natural or something. I don't know. but I'm gonna have to write another book because this didn't make it into the first one. But gardening techniques didn't really make it into the book. It was more soil science, so it's okay. So there's another book in me, I guess. When you're planting like this and you're planting a jungle, you've got to choose a primary crop. So let's just say that you're 4 foot by 4 foot square. You need to focus on one crop that's going to be your main crop. So is it corn? Is it the squash? Is it the beans? Because very seldom when you go out to harvest, do you have a really great crop of all three. What you have is an average crop of all three. And this is why people in the Green Revolution, and that just means modern agriculture, the Green Revolution, Norman Borlaug, he won the Nobel Prize for the Green Revolution. But that's another subject, but I just said that, so I thought I better explain it. But just modern agriculture, that's why we started going with monocrops in one field. Is because it was hard to get a big bumper crop, and it was hard to harvest it if you mixed crops up. In a gardening situation, it's fantastic because you're doing it by hand anyway. But to use a machine, it's impossible to do Three Sisters and harvest corn and beans and squash all in the same field because they're ripening at different times. And there's no way a machine can get that organized. Now, with the modern invention of robots, maybe we can have harvesting robots who can figure that out. But I haven't seen anything like that yet. So primary, I should do we need a whole nother night for this one. But I'll just tell you super fast. Pick your one crop that you want to grow. So if it's going to be corn, then plant your corn in such a way that the corn's going to do really well. And then all your other crops are secondary crops, meaning if they don't give you a fantastic crop, that's okay because they were there to help the corn, and corn was your main crop. So let's say that beans are your main crop. Then what you want to do is plant your beans in such a way that they are going to give you a fantastic, wonderful crop. So focus on the needs of the bean, and then all the other plants are there to help support the beans. So if the beans do great, you did good. And if the other crops don't do as well, you still did good because they were there to support the beans. So in boot camp, we were talking about tomatoes. And somebody wanted to grow tomato, and I was telling them to grow a jungle. But there's a really good chance that if you're growing a bunch of other things that are shading the tomato won't grow quick enough in the early stages, and it will be stunted, and you'll never get a crop. So you need to be careful when planting a jungle-type garden that you know what your primary crops are and your secondary crops. Because if a secondary crop is shading your primary crop, prune it back, cut it out, move it out of the way, be a little bit harsh on it. And if it kills it because you were a little bit too vigorous, that's okay because it was a secondary crop. So this is getting a little bit complicated, but can you kind of see where I'm going with this philosophy?
I understand your philosophy there, but I'm wondering, okay, so how do I make one primary over another? More plants?
No, what? You would just have 3 gardens. And one garden is for the corn, one garden is for the beans, one garden's for the squash, except you plant all the crops in each garden. It's space with the 3 sisters, it's not as important, but it made me think of it, so I wanted to tell you. Just space is the key, and the reason it's not as important with the 3 sisters is because the 3 sisters are naturally conducive to growing with each other, because your cucurbit family is going to sprawl on the ground and be a wonderful ground cover. Your corn is going to go straight up in the air and be an overstory plant. And then your beans are, if they're pole beans, which they should be in a Three Sisters,
Yeah.
not a bush bean, then they will climb up the corn stalks. And so it's just a natural, beautiful marriage in the natural world to make this work out well. Where if you're talking about tomatoes, peppers, cabbages, kale, cilantro, and you're trying to grow those together, it can get a little trickier because some of those things will be growing quicker and faster and shading out your tomato. So anyway, this was a good discussion. Thanks for bringing up some of these ideas tonight.
Along those lines, I'm wondering, I've got two things going through my mind. We have an abundance of melons. All of my melons have sprouted in seed starts, in the little pots. And they're such individual pots that all I have to do is push up on the bottom. They're really unique planting pot that I got online. And so you don't disturb the root. And so I've got all these melons, and one melon in a square foot garden is not going to make me happy when I have like maybe 20 or 30. And so, and you say they cross pollinate too. So I'm just wondering where in this whole area that we have to plant, can I plant them? And what would be good with them? Obviously corn would be. You don't want to cross pollinate the corn though, because we're growing popcorn. We got this round, fluffy popcorn seed that we got. And
Mushroom popcorn.
mushroom popcorn is what it's called. And so we want to plant that, but we're not going to get a whole lot. And yeah, I just want to know where I can plant the melons. I don't want to worry. I'm worried about cross pollination, but hey, who cares? Maybe, and then might have a new form of melon. Who knows? But just, I guess I'm not making myself clear. Oh, and then the beans. Got to put the pole beans in with that square foot garden too. And one watermelon and one cantaloupe and maybe a cucumber and pole beans and carrots. Where do they go? Just in between, anywhere?
Melanie, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Are you overwhelmed?
I'm overwhelmed with, it's cold now and we're leaving again and I can't plant everything that I want to plant. And that's what I'm overwhelmed with. We got to wait till next week now. But my corn is 4 inches high. It's ready to go out.
Okay, that sounds good.
And then plant the beans around it. They're just gonna.
Yeah, just plant stuff, man.
Yeah.
Just plant it.
Okay. Anywhere.
It's gonna be okay. Plant everything a couple of feet apart, and you're gonna be great.
Okay.
Okay.
And then, do you have a discussion anywhere? I was gonna text. Yeah. Do you have a discussion anywhere? You mentioned tonight that tomatoes should not have high nitrogen. I didn't know that. Do you have a discussion on what is really required for each plant family? Have you discussed that at all? I know we
No, but we can discuss it in 15 seconds. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay, get ready.
Compost.
Okay, here go. See, you can teach this. Okay, you have to be watching the screen, okay? You walk out in your garden. Then you put down 4 to 6 inches of a detritus spear, and you put living plants in it, and then you inoculate it with the compost that's filled with bacteria, fungus, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, encotriids, and earthworms. And then you water it, and for the first 3 to 5 years, you give it some supplemental fertilizer like a fish hydrolysate from IFA, and follow the instructions. And that's how you grow this stuff.
Awesome.
Forget the idea about blood meal. Forget that even exists. And then you won't be worried about it because you already know how to do this.
Okay. Well, we do have blood meal and we do have bone meal and got worm castings.
Yeah, those are all good sources of, fertilizers, plant foods. Use them sparingly.
Okay.
In your 4 foot by 4 foot garden, I would use less than a teaspoon of blood meal.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because a little goes a long, long way.
Well, okay.
But you don't
And
even need the blood meal for that application.
What about bone meal?
Yeah, you can spread a bunch of that around. It's a good source of calcium. That's a good idea.
And then I save all of our eggs. We're gonna grind them up and put them in too. They'd be good around tomatoes, I imagine, for calcium.
Okay,
Should we put them in
perfect.
too? Yeah. And
Good.
then the worm castings, and hopefully we'll have some little worms. Well, we do have worms out there now from last year. From what we did last year. So, okay.
Yeah, you're doing better than you think you are. You're doing good. Okay, Jocelyn wrote in here. I know you usually plant around the full moon. With the full moon this week, are you starting anything in seed trays or just transplanting? All right, Jocelyn, I plant my seeds 3 days before the full moon, 12 months a year, every single month. And what I plant is just either a cool season crop, because we are either going into winter or we are in winter. And the warm season crops I plant, when it's not freezing. So, I mean, I started tomatoes and peppers in March, been keeping them in the house where they're warm under my grow lights, and they're all in the greenhouse now. I started transplanting them out there now. So yeah, if you really want to know about the moon planting stuff, look up Maria Thune Almanac. She was brilliant at the way the moon cycle works. Maria Thune, Thun, I think is how you spell her last name.
Thune.
Thank you.
Last year, William, her calendars, like for instance, Cancer, which is a really good time to plant, was completely off from both farmers and Blums. Every single one of her signs was off.
You know
And-
why?
No, why?
Okay, if there are a lot of right-wing conservatives here, they'll hate me and never listen to me again. It's because global warming is real. We should have that discussion too sometime.
Well, the signs are the same. I mean, the moon is going through that constellation regardless of global warming or not. It's just where the moon is passing. And so her calendar was so completely off. I've had it for 5 years now. It's excellent. But last year's was so bad, I didn't order it this year. I'm going with the Blum's calendar and a couple other ones that I find online. And they're all in unison together. Like we are in Scorpio right now, which is the second best time to be planting. And the full moon is either tonight or tomorrow night. I don't remember.
Well, we can't blame Maria because she's been dead for a long time. But the research and the work that she did on that was fantastic. She was super brilliant at that. And a lot of people think that, oh yeah, all that folklore stuff, that it's obsolete because now we have science. The interesting thing about modern science is we often completely disregard the phases of the moon because we don't understand them. It's a lot more easy to understand the phases of the sun. The sun, the daylight, and how that affects plant growth is easier to comprehend than how the moon fluctuates and how that changes the
Did you get that book this year?
What?
Did you pick up her book this year?
No, I haven't. I've never had it.
Okay. All right.
I've just studied what she did, and I think it's fantastic and great. I've never got her annual thing.
Okay.
And I've never followed. So yeah, I just like the scientific work she did of saying how the things that she did originally to figure out that the moon is how the phases of the moon affect plant growth. That was my point.
It's amazing. It works.
So, yeah. So Jocelyn, I plant every month, 3 days before the full moon. That's just the way I do it. In fact, at the beginning of the year, I'll just go through my calendar and I'll find all the full moons and I put them on the calendar And then 3 days before I put it there. That way, when I'm busy working, doing stuff, it's on my calendar and I know when to go and make it happen.
And I actually just wrote down all of the full moons. I think it was last week. Since I couldn't come to boot camp, I worked on other stuff around here that I'd been neglecting for my garden. So I wrote down all those down and I just was sitting there thinking, like, the full moon is this week. I am not really starting tomatoes or peppers at this point because of how late it is. I'm like, what should I be starting? So that's why I was asking. I did start some things, but I was just kind of curious as to what you might be starting this week with it being.
So yeah, I started a lot of stuff. I put in brassicas. Every brassica I have: cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, kale, and a whole bunch of varieties of all those. And the reason I'm planting them right now at the beginning of May is because we have a cool climate. It doesn't get hot here in the summers. When it gets to 100 degrees, it is rare here. Last summer was the hottest summer on record here, and I think it got to 100 degrees. So really hot days here are in the 90s. That's just the way our climate works, which is great because it means we can grow brassicas all summer long. We can grow beautiful cabbages and broccolis. You know, in southern Utah area where I grew up in Hurricane, you had to grow them in the early spring and the late fall. It was impossible to grow them in the, you know, through the summer. You could grow certain varieties of cabbage because they're a little tougher for the heat, but not broccoli and cauliflower.
I have a quick question on this topic. I've heard that you're supposed to transplant at a different phase of the moon type stuff than plant seeds. Could you touch on that?
It's true, yeah. You just have to get one of the almanacs that talk about that stuff to figure that out. I have too much to do to plan my life around the exact date of when to do what, because they will tell if you get really into that planting, here's what happens. There's a perfect day every month to transplant root crops, and then there's another day to transplant fruiting crops, and another day to transplant leafy crops. I can't do that. I approach life like it's an Olympic sport. I'm going to pull my hair out if there's a different day because I want to transplant everything within a 2-hour period, and I'm going to do it when I want. The thing is, it doesn't make a big enough difference. It's not like trying to plant tomatoes on Christmas Day. That would be a really bad thing to do in North America. Like transplanting tomato plants outside on Christmas Day in North Dakota would be the wrong time to plant them. So did my analogy make any sense at all?
Yes, it did. Can you say the name of that person one more time for the almanacs?
Maria Thune, but there's a bunch of them. And apparently there's people who don't like Maria Thune's almanac from last year. Maybe it's not very accurate. Maybe it needs to be redone by somebody more competent than whoever took over her thing, because she's been gone for a while.
It changes every year. If you're talking about transplanting, tomorrow is a full moon. It's a great day to transplant. And so is next Saturday. Not this Saturday, but next Saturday.
It sounds like Melanie Fisher is the next, she's the next person to follow.
I'm following the Blum's calendar. That's a great one too. It's like Farmer's Almanac, but it's easier than Farmer's for me.
All right, good stuff. Okay, we are 8 minutes past 8 o'clock, which means it's been a long time tonight. Let's wrap this up by saying thank you for being here. And you can text me questions. You can send me questions on my email, or you can just bring your questions to this Thursday night event. And hopefully this has helped you to have the best garden of your entire life. Good night and good night.
Night.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.